G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward and Happy New Year everybody, and we're starting off the new year. This is our first pattern together for 2022. It is a beautiful Snuggle Bear. I normally create collectibles that sit on a shelf. This little guy is for cuddling. I've been asked over and over again, can you please make us a pattern that is actually for little children to take to bed and snuggle? This one is it. I'm introducing you to a new fabric, maybe not new to you, new to me. It's called Sherpa. It's been around for years. It's used in coats and blanket making, clothing, all sorts of things. I have applied it to my bear and I have tweaked it, and it is a knit back synthetic, which I would normally stay away from, but I have found it to be wonderful if you know the tips and tricks that I'm going to show you today. And this pattern, I've designed it especially for this fabric. This fabric is really, really inexpensive. It's wonderful. Comes in a multitude of colours. So you can tell I'm really taken with it. So I've designed a pattern especially for you all for this fabric, and you can make it up in a heavier weight polar fleece as well. That will work as well. You could also make it up in a mohair. So all you need to do is find that pattern, the free pattern for you. It's in the description box below. I'll also put it number 1 in the comments. You can print those pattern templates out on your own home printer. Do make sure that you set your printer to be printing at actual size, or perhaps A4 might work better. Always ask me in the comments if you have any problems with printing, and we will help you sort that out. Remember too that I include all seam allowances within my pattern. So let's get busy making my beautiful Snuggle Bear. Okay, so before we start on our little soft cuddly bear, I'm going to show you the fabric that I'm going to be using. As I said, it is called Sherpa, and a lot of you may have seen it before. It is a knit back fabric, but it's a fairly stable knit back, so it's quite different from your usual synthetic furs, which I repeat, I do not recommend synthetic furs, but this is a different fabric altogether, and the pile itself can pretty much go any way. It's really good, it's quite stable, it's quite easy to work with and compresses well, and you actually can trim it a little. So it does need a little bit of help though. And that is that stretch, we don't want that stretch, particularly in some key points in our bear. I do really encourage you to take the time to do this first step that I'm about to show you. It will make all of the difference to your sewing experience. Ultimately, it's a few minutes that you need to do here at this stage of drawing up that will save you so much time as you go on progress through the bear. And if you want to be making these up for craft fairs, for selling and so on, you want to make them quickly, then this is really going to help you out. So it is absolutely fabulous stuff in my opinion, and it comes in such a huge variety of colours. I will actually put a link to my supplier in the video details below for you. They are in Australia, but they're just absolute quality with their fabrics, and this one comes in I think about 12 colours, right up to the vibrant pinks and lime greens, and then your naturals and neutrals as well. I have been watching all of you lovely people sharing on Pay It Forward, and so many of you have been making items in blue, and I thought it was about time I used some blue, so that's why I've gone for that. And I'm also keeping this bear completely blue, very, very tonal, so I'm not going to be using any different coloured foot pads or anything like that, keeping it all blue. Of course you can do that. When we actually put foot pads in this bear, because of the nature of the fabric, you don't really see a clear foot pad edge anyway, and it tends to make it a little wobbly if you put a contrasting colour. So I just keep it all the same colour, but that's up to you, you can definitely do that. So first of all, I want to show you your leg pattern piece. It looks like this on your pattern template. You just need to trace it out, flip it here to trace it out as one whole piece. Those instructions are written on your templates anyway, and you have to reverse it, which means your joint spot goes in the reverse spot on the other side. So, and the other thing you're going to need to be doing is using a laundry marker for tracing around your pattern pieces. It has to be a laundry marker because of this next step. So you can see I've got mine all traced out. Now this is a masterclass tip that I'm going to give you here. This is what I do with all of my mohair patterns, anything I'm making in mohair. So I have a mixture made up, which is just simply PVA glue, your normal white glue. Here in Australia it's called Aquadear, and it is 2 parts water and 1 part the PVA glue. Mix it up in a container and really make sure it's all well mixed. I've got myself, I'm using a tinting brush, a hairdressing tinting brush. You just need something that's quite firm. A pastry brush sometimes can do it as well. And we're going to paint this solution onto the back of our pattern pieces, not all of them, but key points. What that's going to do, it's going to calm the stretch down, and it's also going to stop our edges from fraying, which means we're going to put it on all of our openings. So I've kept this pattern. It's been designed specifically for this fabric. You can use polar fleece instead. It won't be quite as full. Your finish won't be as full, but it's put together in the same way. If you're using polar fleece, you don't do this PVA on the back because polar fleece is quite stable on its own. So I hope all of that makes sense, but now I'm going to show you. So I've just got my mixture here. Now a couple of the pieces I absolutely fully coat, and they are my head pieces. So all I'm going to do is just work that in, and you've got to make sure that you're covering those lines because it's those edges that we're trying to stabilise. And do just go in the direction of your pile. Now Sherpa does have a directional pile. If you feel it, you'll see that it goes smoothly one way and you can feel butt up against it the other way. So that's your pile direction. It really is quite obvious. So on my head pieces, so my head centre gusset and my side head pieces, I fully coat it. And don't worry, it's not going to be too stiff. I do this on stable mohair, and then sew through that. This just stabilises it that little bit better. And then, of course, both of my side head pieces. Now, I'm going to go through the other pattern pieces and I'm going to do anything that's a point or a hemmed edge, which is going to be the edges of those ears. All those points are going to be much easier to sew if they've got a little bit of this on the edge. And of course, PVA glue is really, really cheap. So it's just a really cheap way of stabilising your fabric. So on the edges of the ears, I'll do both those ears. And then of course you want to do it on each of your openings. So when we go to close those openings, they won't be stretching as much. It'll still have some give, but not enough to cause a problem. And I also like to do just my lower curves. Anything that's a nice clean curve or a sharp curve, I just want to help myself out. It's going to be much easier to pin and sew them. So the lower paws, and I'll do these sections too. I will also do those openings. So on the body pieces, of course, I do that back opening. So this is the body back. That's the back opening. And I also do my necklines. You see, I'm not being too careful. I'm going right outside of the lines there. I just want to make sure it's fully coated. And I also, anywhere where there's a point, so that base there is going to be a lot easier to deal with if I've got some of this on it. So same, I'll do the necks here. I'll do the points at the bottom. This is the body front. I'm going to move on to the legs. And on the legs, first of all, those foot pads. The foot pads get fully coated in the same way as your headpieces, because we want those to be nice and stable for pinning into that foot. It's going to make it a whole lot easier. You can see it's really quick. It's not precise, but you do need to be sure to be covering those lines. You see now why we use a laundry marker, because otherwise we would just be making all that ink bleed. So again, I'm going to be doing my openings on the legs, and on the bottom of the feet I do the points and along the base there. It'll stop that stretching when we're putting that foot pad in. Those toes, and I like to do these curves here. I'm just really working that in. I'll do those openings, points here and here, and that's it. And we let that dry. So I will go over that whole sheet, make sure I've covered everything. If you wanted to cover the whole thing, you could, but with this one, because it's a Sherpa cuddly softy bear, we want our midsections, bellies and arms to be nice and soft and cuddly. So really we stabilise what needs to be, have some finer work done to it. So that's all we need to do. We need to leave that, let that dry. And once that's dry, we're going to be cutting out. So cutting out with Sherpa is almost exactly the same as cutting out with mohair. And that is, we need nice, sharp, small scissors. We're not just cutting into our fabric like that, because we're going to have a horrible straight line that cuts into the pile. You want to slip your scissors in between the pile. So my scissors are actually right in between and just on the backing fabric. And then you can see, you can do little snips. Pull the scissors out, slide them back in, and that's how you cut out your pattern pieces. You'll get used to it. It's just like cutting out mohair. So the only other fabric that I would recommend for this particular pattern is it won't look good made up in just fabric, because it's been designed for that extra bulk of that pile. It will look too thin. Made up in fabric or felt. You need to make it up in something with quite a solid pile. This pattern will make up absolutely beautifully in mohair. So if you want to do that, go right ahead. So look, I'm just going to let that dry. I'm going to come back and run through our materials and requirements. Okay, so let's run through our materials and requirements. Now we've cut out, I have all of my pieces cut out now. I've got my two body back pieces, and as just before we ran through putting that PVA mixture on them, I've got my two body front pieces. I have my leg pieces, which are cut like that we fold over. The two foot pad pieces, which have the PVA glue on them. We've got two arms, inner arms and outer arms. Your inner arms are the ones that have the joint mark on them. And then we've got our head pieces. So it's quite a simple pattern, and I've kept it really, really simple. So the challenges of actually sewing the Sherpa, I've minimised them by not adding paw pads and keeping it all really basic. It ends up just a beautiful, round, fluffy, cuddly little bear. So we've got our two side head pieces, which are now quite stable with that PVA mix. Also that centre head gusset, and then we have our 4 ear pieces there. So that's all your pattern pieces done. We are going to need our joints. So we have a neck joint, which is 40 millimeters, 2 leg joints, also 40 millimeters, and 2 arm joints, which are 35 millimeters. I will put a link at the top there for you all to have a look at my jointing video. I make up these joints myself. It's the easiest way, I think. And then we're going to need our face details. Now there's so many options here, and I'm going to run you through all of them. Now please realise that I'm offering this bear as a child's bear, a child's toy, something to cuddle and take to bed. So I'm working with safety eyes. So you can use anything from a 12mm to a 14mm safety eye. I wouldn't go bigger or smaller than that. So if I am using the safety eyes, I'm going to be using 12mm. These are black with a clear, just a clear section around the outside, which is nice. It shows some of that fur through. And of course they need their backs that go with them. Or alternatively, you could use teddy bear eyes, glass teddy bear eyes. These are 14mm and they're blue glass. Now they are added after the fact. What I'm going to be showing you today is how to add the safety eyes. I may go ahead and use these. I'll see when I get to that point, but that's an option as well. So now as far as the nose goes, again, I'm keeping with that same thought that we're making it as a child's cuddly. So this is the only time you'll ever see me even go near anything like this. This is a safety nose, but it is a plain flock nose. So it's got like a velvet coating of flock over it. You can use it just as it is on its own, and that will be passed through and snapped on, and that will never come off. The reason why I don't stitch a nose on this bear is because of the Sherpa, because it's very hard to add a template and stitch a nose nice and evenly, because this is such a thick pile that we don't trim away. So it's better if the nose is a little more protruding. Now, while I really don't like these noses, these flock ones can be really handy because you don't have to use them just as they are. You can do all sorts to them. What I may be doing is adding a cover of a pretty fabric. So I've got a nice navy and light blue print, and what I'll be doing is just pulling a drawstring around that and covering that little nose. So we've got a bit of extra detail there. It's covered, a little bit more volume to that nose, and I'll show you that procedure. And again, I will decide whether I go with that at the time. The flock noses themselves on their own, they really do look quite nice in keeping with this style of bear, so don't be afraid to use them. The ones I avoid are horrible moulded plastic noses. So, and also the application of these, because it's only that little circle on the back, there is a little bit of gap around here, but because we're working with Sherpa, that's all quite hidden. So this is why they work in this situation. I wouldn't recommend them generally. The other thing you can do, and my masterclass friends, you can take this nose and sculpt over it. You could do that too, and then still add it as a safety nose. You would need to sculpt it in epoxy sculpt for that to be safe. So that's the options for the nose there. We're going to be filling with polyester filling. You can add a little weight if you like. You'll need your wool felting needle for packing some of that stuffing. You will need some pearl thread. I'm using 8-ply to stitch in a little mouth line. And of course, your basic requirements, you will need extra strong thread for closing and for doing a little bit of hand stitching there. I do have my machine on this one set to the stitch length to 2.5. I nearly always sew everything with my stitch length set to 2. 2.5 works better when working with this Sherpa, and also my seam allowance I have enlarged on this one to around about 5mm, if you can keep it that small. So that's it for our materials and requirements. Let's start with, we're going to start on the body. Now, the reason why I'm starting on the body with this one is because if this is a new fabric to you, it's always a good idea to make up the body first, because the head is the most important detailed part. So by the time you've made the body, you've got used to working with the new fabric, you'll have a better result on that head. So let's get started on the body. So I'm going to start with my back body pieces, and I've got right sides together. Of course, this is our neck here at the top, and you can see those 2 marks are for our opening, and this is nicely stiffened, and so is this top edge. Couple of tips for working with the Sherpa, and it's much like working with fur, where we want to tuck in that pile as much as we can. It's not as important as when you're working with fur, but we still want to tuck that in. You wouldn't just pin it and sew it with all of this poking out, because we want that pile to puff out nicely from the seams. So it really is just a matter of pinning and tucking that fur as you go. Now make sure that you really line up those marks on the back there. Remember that your fabric has stretch in it, so it's important that it is all lined up. So when we go to close that opening at the end, it's going to be the same either side. I'll do the same here. I will pin that one all the way down to the base here. So this is the back opening. So then I will go ahead and I will overcast with a tacking stitch from the neck to the start of that opening, and from the bottom of that opening to the base here. I overcast everything when I'm working with this sort of fabric because it holds it all together. Then you can take your pins out and take it to the machine. So we obviously leave that back section open. This is your 2 front pieces. This is your front belly, and that's the section we're going to be stitching. We're going to do the same thing, pin and tuck that pile in from the base here to the neck. I'm going to overcast it, and then I'm going to go ahead and stitch it. As I said, my stitch length at 2.5. I still do sew my seams 2 times, one straight over the top of the other, just for strength. And you'll find that the 2.5 sews it beautifully, and the feed dogs will feed it through well. This is all quite thick, but it's very, very soft. So I'm going to get the front seam and the back seam stitched. Now once you have those front and back center seams stitched, you can pop those through. And in this case, using Sherpa, we don't use any kind of a brush on those seams. That's also why it's really important to make sure that your fibres, your pile is tucked in when you sew it, so that it is all just popping out here and it's not trapped within the seam. You see that's a lovely finish there for the belly. And so now we're just going to put right sides together, and we're going to sew the back to the front. We'll start at the base seam. I take out a couple of my tacking stitches to open that seam out on each piece. That way I can actually just put a pin straight through that seam and line it up with the other side, straight through at that seam allowance of about 5 mil. And now we're just going to line that all up and make our way, again tucking that pile as we go, just pinning that into place just as we did with the front. I like to go side to side to make sure I'm doing it evenly. I'm not stretching it as I go because it is a stretch fabric. I'm just letting those pieces line up together without forcing it. You'll find that it will match up beautifully, and you just need to go all the way up to that neck edge there. Match up those 2 points there and those 2 points there, all the way around. Then we're just going to, I'm going to overcast all the way around, take that one back to the machine, and 2 rows of stitching all the way around. Make sure you're back and forth on that start and finish there, and also really anchor in that base junction there. So there I've got that body all sewn up, and you can have a good look at my seam allowance there, you see. So that's, mine is about 5 millimeters, and that's about what you should have. Now before we turn this body through, first of all you want to make your holes at your joint spots, and make them on the belly side where that little mark is. And also I have gone around that neck edge with a doubled strand of extra strong thread, sewn a running stitch, left my tail ends hanging and drawn that in and knotted it off. Just leave enough room for your neck bolt to go through. Then we can just turn that one through, which is very easy given this fabric. There's a lot of benefits to this fabric. Once you've worked with it a few times, you get used to, you understand when you work with a different fabric, after a while you understand its properties and what it likes to do and what it doesn't like to do. And then you'll find it's really quite easy to work with. So there we go. So that's got our beautiful body, and the benefits of Sherpa is that it does just plump out those seams just so beautifully. It's perfect for bears and animals. We're going to be making a whole range of animals in this fabric here on Pay It Forward. There we go. So that's got our body done. We can pop that one aside and we're going to start working on the arm. So this is my little completed arm, and that's how that looks. You can see I've just got my joints sitting there, and closing those openings is really quite simple and it's nice and invisible. And I've got that one firm packed on the hand and on the shoulder and quite soft through the middle. So we've got a squishy finish. Because it's such a thick plush fabric, you don't need a lot of filling. So we're going to start by putting those arm pieces together. Now, it's important when you're sewing your arm and leg pieces to be sewing on the outer arm or the outer leg. So the inner arm is the one that has the spot on it for the joint. The reason for that is, particularly with this fabric, because it's a knit fabric, it will take on the shape of your hands and it will follow the shape of your hands. And what we want to encourage with these arms and legs is that they turn in nicely and evenly. So make sure that on each arm you're actually working with your pinning, your overcasting and your stitching all on the outer arm. So again, I'm just going to find those starting points of those openings. Those are the first ones I pin in place. I'm tucking that fur and I'm going to line that up. You must make sure that's lined up, so when you close that opening, it's going to be the same on each side. And then all you need to do is go ahead and tuck in and pin all the way around. And I'm going to be overcasting mine as I always do, removing those pins, and then I will sew right the way around 2 times, making sure you really back and forth on that start and finish, because that's where you're going to turn that arm through. And make sure that as you're pinning this one around, you're not stretching it as you go. Just let it lay where it will. It will be fine. If you've added a little bit of extra PVA on the base here, you'll find it much easier to tuck that fur in. You can see because it holds itself. On the areas where it doesn't have PVA, of course, it just wants to fold in on itself. So that's why at your key points, if you've got that PVA mix, it's going to make life a lot easier for you. So I'm going to get that second arm stitched up. Once you have that arm all stitched up, our next step before we turn it through is to make the hole where our joint mark was using an awl, and then I enlarge it with my knitting needle. Never ever snip the hole, you just want to part the fibres. So now we can turn that one through. And make sure that you push out all of those seams really well. If you have any pile that is particularly caught up, just go over that seam with your needle and you can just pull it out. But be very gentle with the Sherpa, because you'll end up with a fuzzy mess. So just ease it out of that seam to give you that nice finish. So I've just reinforced my hole. Make sure that that's really well and truly done. And now I'm going to add my shoulder joint. So because I'm using my system where I glue the joints in. Now the reason why I glue the joints in is so that I can glue it in, I can stuff the limb and sew up that limb independent of the body. And then when I add the limb to the body, when I go to do up the other side from the inside of the body, this disc isn't going to slip. so I'll be able to tighten it. So that's why I do that, and I've given you my jointing video to have a look at if you want to see how to do that. You might be using cotter pins, which will work just as well. So I've got some clear craft glue just in there, and I'm just going to take my forceps, I'm going to slip that in there and straight out of that spot there. Make sure that I've compressed all of that down. And I generally find that if you throw your disc, corresponding disc on the other side, and just wind that down temporarily, it keeps your joints all together so you don't lose all your bits. But it also compresses all of that, and that glue will dry, everything will be nice and flat and it won't move. And the other benefit of that is that we can go ahead and fill this limb now without worrying about that moving, so it's going to stay nicely put. So how you fill these limbs is really a matter of personal choice. Now I still like to pack the paws quite firm and the shoulder section quite firm, and the midsection I leave quite soft. But because of the properties of the Sherpa, you could just soft fill these arms and it'll still have that lovely shape. I just like the feel of it, and I like the fact that there's a little bit of weight on the end and the shoulder holds itself well, and that it's a bit soft in the middle. So totally up to you. When I pack the shoulder, I actually go in with my wool felting needle and pack all of that stuffing up into the shoulder to stop it from slipping down. It generally won't, because this is quite a porous fabric inside, but I do like to pack it up in there so that it doesn't shift. Then I'll just pack this section very, very lightly, and we will come back and I will show you how to close that opening. So now I'm ready to close that opening. Now the first thing that I do is that I just tuck in, even though that's softly filled in here, I just tuck in all of those fibres so they're not going to get caught up in my needle when I'm closing. And you can take your very sharp scissors and just take the tiniest bit of pile away from the edge if that makes it easier for you. Just about 1 millimetre, not more, because otherwise it will show. So then you need your extra strong thread and a single strand, a whole pile of knots on the end, a great big large knot. Now this is a ladder stitch. It's how we close all of our openings on anything in soft sculpture. I have a video that shows you exactly how to do this up close and personal, so you can check that out. I'll put the link at the top there for you. But I'm going to show you on here, because this pile is so thick, there's a couple of ways to make it easier for you. So first of all, just as usual, we come up right where that seam starts to open out in that seam allowance, and that knot will hold there. We're going to take it across, just as we always do, straight across. You need to be removing the pile. You need to be fiddling with that pile as you go here. So straight across into the other side, and we're taking 1 stitch down in that seam allowance. So straight down, and that's taken 1 stitch across. And I do recommend, you see I'm using a deeper colour. It's so invisible. This pile is so thick it will be really, really invisible, but it helps you sewing this one closed. So now I'm going to find that spot where that knot is, where I first went in. And I'm going to travel down 1 stitch. Same as on the other side. Tug that, and that pulls those 2 stitches in. Now what I find with the Sherpa is that because it's so thick, it's harder to find your exit point each time. So I tend to do, see how I've pulled that open again? There's my hole. You need to go back into the same hole that you came out of each time, back and forth. So we're going to travel down another stitch. And where I would normally pull that stitch up, I'm not going to, because I want to clearly see where my other stitch was. So then I can travel down just the length of a stitch. You want to keep those stitches nice and even. And now I will pull up both those stitches, and it will still knit together well because it's a very open weave fabric on that base, that backing fabric, so it will still knit together well. Now I need to just ease it open a little so that I can find again where that stitch came out. Travel down again. Like I said, it's a fabric you'll get used to working with, and you'll understand what it likes to do. So remember, I don't pull that one in because I want to see that stitch. In again, travel down, keeping your stitches nice and even each side. So now I can give it a squeeze and pull it all in. You see it's knitting together really well. Absolutely invisible there. And you just carry on right the way down to the base here, pulling in on every second stitch, and then you can dive in and you'll find you can part that fur to find your base fabric. You can take one little stitch, make a knot, dive your needle back in and sink that knot, and that opening will be closed. And that has that opening nicely closed, beautifully invisible, and of course go over that opening with your needle just to pull out that pile. No one will ever know it was there. So now we can pop that one aside. We've got our two arms. Now we're going to work on our legs. And this is a completed leg that I've already done. You can see that foot pad by putting it in just in the same fabric. It's just a beautiful soft finish, and everything looks beautifully rounded. So what we need to do is take our other leg piece, and of course it's right sides together. We're just going to fold that one, and I tend to anchor it at the toes. Now remember what I said about working on the outer part of the leg. This is the inside. We're working, pinning from the outer side. Again, first of all, I tuck in that toe section. If you've got your PVA mixture on there, you'll find that point will hold itself, it won't collapse on you. So I like to pin the toe into place, and then I'm going to match up my opening points. You can see there, and we're just going to sew. I'm going to overcast as I always do, and then I'm going to machine stitch 2 times from the toe to this base of the opening, leave this section open, back and forth and back around here, right to the top there. And make sure that you sew that 2 times, and you really back and forth on the start and finish of those openings. Our next step, once that leg is sewn, is to add our foot pads. Make sure that you've got the pile going downwards towards the heel. We're going to take a pin and take it through at our seam allowance, straight through that centre mark. And you'll notice that on my toe section here, I've opened up some of my overcasting stitch so that I can open that seam up nice and flat. And I really want to see where that seam is, because I want to put my pin straight through it, straight through the centre at the seam allowance, so it comes out right through the middle. Really want to anchor that in the centre there. Push that pin all the way down, turn that one around. I'm going to tuck that fur in. Your PVA glue is letting you do this. It's much easier to do with that on there. Tuck all that fur in. We're going to do the same. We're matching up those 2 centre marks and a pin. In this case, we can take some up on the other side, and that will hold. So if you haven't seen me pin a foot pad in before, this is the best way to do it. Tucking that fur in, Use your pin. You put your pin through both layers, flip it over, take up a little on the other side, push your pin head all the way down and it clamps it into place. So this is pinning in 3D. Makes it so much easier to sew. I always go from side to side so that I make sure I'm pinning that in evenly. So again, we pin through all the layers, flip it over, just take up a little on the other side, push that pin head all the way down. I'm going to continue on. You'll see that foot pad will fit in beautifully. I'm going to pin that all the way around and then I'm going to overcast it in place so then I can take all my pins out. Now you can see all of those pins are removed. It makes it so much easier for sewing that foot pad in, and you can see what a beautiful fit it is. I mean, it stands up on its own already. So now we're going to actually sew the seam of that foot pad. This area is a little too small and tricky to get under the machine and get a good result. So I sew it with a stab back stitch. It's the stitch that we use for any hand sewing. I'm going to put the link at the top there for a video I have that shows you this one. You'll notice that I'm using extra strong thread and a single strand, and also I'm going for that deeper blue again because it just makes it easier because the stitches do tend to sink into that knit fabric. So I start off with just 2 stitches on top of each other and I come up from the underneath in my seam allowance and I go straight back into the hole that I came out of. And you only sew this once because it's extra strong thread and you're sewing it back and front. So I travel a bit further along, always coming up from the underneath and then back into that hole. So the stitch is fully linked. Pull that nice and firm because we're trying to compress all of those layers. And you'll be able to do a stitch, because it's all linked like this, you should be able to do a stitch that's as accurate as sewing on the machine. Nice and neat and tidy. You need to be aware of the shape of that foot pad. We like it to be a nice curve, no jagged stops and starts. Of course, because we're using the Sherpa on both, a lot of that is hidden, so it's a very forgiving fabric as well. So you can see each time I'm just coming up from the underneath, travelling the length of a stitch and going back in again. All I need to do is just make my way around that entire foot pad. Make sure that when you get to the 2 junctions here that you anchor a couple of stitches in, so that's really secure back and front. So I have turned that leg through and I have added that joint just in exactly the same way as we did with the arm, and I've just popped that other one on the other side just to hold it there for now. So now I can go ahead and fill this limb. Now the feet I stuff nice and firm and the top of the thigh here around that joint nice and firm, but through this section you can see I've kept that quite soft. So I'm going to do the same with this one. And again, I'll be using my wool felting needle to just pop in there and pack that filling so that it stays up in that shoulder. And then we just go ahead once we've got that filled and we close that opening in exactly the same way as we did with the arm. So that has all of my body parts completed. We can pop those aside and let's start on the head. So first of all, we're going to have a look at that nose. Now, like I said, I think that with the Sherpa, a more protruding nose definitely works better because we're limited in the amount of pile that we can cut away. And this is, as I said, a flock nose. So it's a plastic nose in the triangle shape and it's covered in a flock sort of a fabric, a flock treatment. So what we can do is cover it, and there's a few ways that we can do that. Now, I'm going to cover mine just with, this is just a quilting cotton. I want that finish of that very tiny floral print. This is an example of one covered with just a scrap of a star print fabric. And then I've gone ahead and coated it with my heavy gel gloss medium. You don't have to do that at all. You can just pull that fabric around it, but this is just a nice finish and it holds everything in place. You can also keep glossing it and you can end up with a really shiny finish if that's what you're after. Now there's a couple of fabrics that you can do this with. What you have to keep in mind, it has to be a fine fabric, so we don't want too much bulk at the back here, because we still have to pop it in and be able to clamp it down from behind. So another good fabric is just your standard t-shirt material. Will stretch over that beautifully. You can see that there, that comes in so many colours. Lycra, of course, will work well. A stretch satin, or just as I'm using here, just a fine cotton. So nothing thick and chunky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just be sewing a drawstring around the edge of this shape, and I sew that. I actually start at the top. I've given you this template and it is for a 20mm nose. So they come in a few different sizes, but 20mm I'm using here, and that's the template that you have. And I'm just going to sew a very small running stitch just close to the edge all the way around this shape. I'm going to leave my tail ends hanging there so that I'll be able to draw it in around that nose. So I've gone all the way around and I've just tied my preliminary knot there. So this is the top. So now I can just slip that nose in right in the center there, and I want to pull up those threads around it. It's good because it's flocked, so it tends to sit where you put it. Doesn't slip around. And it really is just about pulling that in very, very tight and adjusting all of your gathers. You see it comes right in, and you should get a nice pulled in even finish around that shape. But do take the time to adjust those gathers in a pleasing way. You'll get less puckering and gathers if you use a stretch knit fabric, but I really wanted this little print with the little flowers on the side there. So really get that as tight as you can. Make sure it's all tucked in there at the base, and knot that off at least 4 times. So you can see there I've got that pulled in nice and tight, and I've got a nice even finish all the way around that nose. And now I'm just going to take my brush and my gloss gel medium, I'll have the name of this in the video details for you, and I'm just going to coat it, and I will just give it one decent coat, and that will be enough. I don't want a shiny finish, I want a matte finish on this, but this is just going to protect that nose. And of course you can just use these noses and just have them with the flock finish. But it has been my experience that if you've ever seen old bears with those flock noses, that flock does not stand the test of time. It does wear away. So this is just preserving it, and it's giving it just a great original touch to your bear or your animal. Something completely different. You can really colour coordinate it and really make it a feature. You're only limited by your imagination. You can see I've just worked that in. We're just going to let that one dry, and it'll have a nice permanent finish. So next we're going to move on to make our ears. So first of all, what I do is I take my very sharp scissors that I use for cutting pile and cutting out, and I've just taken about 5mm of that pile off the lower edge of each ear. It's just going to make it easier for us to turn them through and close the opening at the base. So then what we need to do is pin those ears together, making sure again that we're tucking in that pile, and we'll get a nice point on the corner there because we've taken that pile off. And also on mine, I used my PVA mixture just across the base there, so it's easy to make those points hold. I will pin and tuck around that whole top edge, and then we're going to stitch on the machine And we need to just leave an opening. I like to come in just about 1 centimetre from each corner and start my stitching there and go all the way around. It's the same 5mm seam allowance. By coming in just a little bit, it means we can turn that corner out and it'll be a nice, clean, sharp corner. So just get those pinned. I will overcast them and get both of those ears stitched and turned through. I have those ears ready now, and there's a couple of things that I like to do. So I don't know if you can see the difference between those two ears, but this one I've just trimmed the fuzziness off to get a beautiful, clean, really rounded, chubby sort of an ear, and it really does make a difference. And the Sherpa does trim minimally very well, so you can see that all I've done is just taken off the fluffy bits. I'm rounding it out by taking off the top this side, take off some length there. It just gives a tidier, tighter look to your bear. We're going for that very storybook look with the very roundy, cute little ears. Very appealing baby sort of face. You see the way that I'm taking some from the sides because I'm rounding that out. There we go. Just make sure that they're matching, they're both nice and tidy. So the other thing that I like to do, because I've got that opening there, I like to take a little bit of clear craft glue and my wooden skewer. Now this is optional, you don't have to do this. You can just sew those ears on and they'll hold pretty well. But I actually want those two pieces to be joined together so that when I do sew it on, it's really nicely cupped on the head. And just by adding that little bit of craft glue inside really helps to do that. So I just put a little bit of glue on some paper using my wooden skewer, and I'm just going to add just that little bit, just a little smear. And I try and stay away from the edges because I need to tuck that under. So I'm really just pressing those edges together. Not too much glue, just enough to give it a little bit of hold. I'll do the same with the other one, let that dry, and then I can just turn these edges under to match this hem and just slip stitch that opening closed on each ear, and they will be ready to go into our bear head. So I will just repeat with the other ear and then we can get started on the head. I'm ready here with my two side head pieces, and the first thing I do with those is I take off just the corner, tiny bit of the corner at the front there, take that pile off, just so that point is exposed, but nothing more than that, because we really do want to leave the coat on. We do a tiny bit of trimming afterwards, but in essence we need all of that coat on for a nice fluffy finish. So then we're going to put our right sides together and we are going to line up that point, which of course is much easier without that coat there, and a pin straight through there. We're going to do the same thing, tucking that fur all the way down to the neck edge, and we're going to sew that centre front chin seam. I will overcast it first and then sew it 2 times, the same 5mm seam from the tip of the nose down to the neck edge. Turn that front seam through once you've stitched it and make sure that that is all pushed out well. So I'm going to pop that one back. I have gone ahead and just taken the few tacking stitches from the front there so I can press that seam open nice and flat. And now we're going to take our head gusset. We're going to pin in just this front section. So I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to take it through that centre mark at my 5mm seam allowance, and I'm going to put it through that front seam, also at the seam allowance, and make sure it goes straight through that seam. And then we're just going to tuck that fur, and we're going to take a pin, straight through both layers, flip that one over and take up just a little on the other side and push that pin head all the way down, and that really clamps those pins into place. And I like to go from side to side, so I know I'm pinning it in evenly. So pin through both, flip it over, take up some on the other side. And then all you need to do is line up the rest to match up with your mark on the other side. So you've got a mark here and a mark here, and notice that I'm doing all of my work on the center gusset. I'm not working from this side. So I'm going to get that one pinned into place, both sides nice and even, and then I'm going to overcast it ready for my stab back stitch. Now that I've removed all of those pins, I can sew my stab back stitch. So this is the same stitch that we sewed the foot pad in with. You can see I've started there with just 2 stitches, one on top of the other, and I'm just coming from the underside in at my seam allowance, and I'm just going to sew in the front nose section, because again this is a section we can't get under the machine and we need it to be really, really accurate. So again, just travelling along, keeping your stitches nice and small and going back into that exit hole each time, and you'll be able to create a nice even line all the way around the front. Make sure you anchor with a couple of stitches at your start and finish, and also right on that centre nose point there. Again, once you've had that stitch, make sure that you pop that one through that front nose section and push those seams out, and just check that seam that you've got it all nice and straight and even. Pop that nose back through, and then we're just going to line up the side head seam all the way down to the base of the neck. So again, we're going to be tucking that pile as much as we can. If you've kept to your seam allowances, you'll find that that head gusset will fit in beautifully right the way down to that neck edge there. And again, I'm working on the head gusset. Don't be sewing this from the side head piece. So I will pin that into place, overcast it, and then this one can go under the machine. You can stitch that 2 times and then just repeat with the other side, and we will have our head fully stitched. Okay, so now I've turned that head through. I've just got some temporary ears on there. I just cut an extra couple of rough little ears, just it helps me get the facial features right. Just pin those in temporarily into place. And I have soft filled that head very quickly, filled out that muzzle and the rest of the head. It is very soft. And I have to do that because I have specifically designed this bear to use safety eyes. So the design of the head has a really definite, what we call a stop. So it comes in and it's almost a right angle back up again, which means the eyes can be put in as safety eyes and still look well sunk and into a good position. So that's it. It's really a great pattern to be using all of those beautiful coloured safety eyes, and they will still look quite natural because I'll sit nice and deep. So I'm actually not going to be using safety eyes. Mine's just a sample bear, and I'm going to be using my blue glass, so I'll put them in afterwards, but I'm going to assume that that's what most of you are going to be going with. So what you'll need to do, the reason why we temporarily stuff the head, of course, is we've got to get that eye position correct. So I've got my tester eyes here. They're just eyes on pins. You can get from any teddy bear supply outlet. And you want to get the eyes in the right position. And as I said, I've specifically designed this head that they sit right in that turn of that corner there. And that's where they sit best. If you put the eyes, changing the position of eyes on a bear greatly alters their appearance. So just to show you, totally different look. You can do it intentionally, but generally you'll find that there's a sweet spot where they look absolutely perfect. And that is in that little section there where it turns in. So you want to make those holes ready using your awl. You can use a marker to mark them in place, make the hole bigger, and then you'll need to enlarge it a little with a knitting needle or something like that, ready to take the shank of your safety eye if that's what you're using, which is usually quite thick. So once you've got those two sorted, we need to look at the nose. Now in this case, I've covered my nose and I'm going to be using a safety nose. Same deal, we need to find the position of that nose, and it actually sits just below that seam. So it's only about 1/2 centimetre below that top curve there. I've made my initial spot and I've enlarged it again with my knitting needle, so that's all ready to go. What we have to do though, because we're using a safety nose, we want to stitch in a mouth, and I want those threads to come from the underneath that safety nose. I don't want it to be stopping and starting and there being a space. So I also have to add my nose threads first before we put the nose in. I'll show you how I do that. So I'm assuming you've got your marks all in place. We're going to pull those ears off, take those out, and then we're just going to unstuff our head. I have all of that stuffing removed, and this is where the nose is going to sit. So it sits right on that curve, it just goes over the top of that curve of the seam. I can always trim up around the nose once everything is stuffed and done. So I can see where that goes. I've tested that out, you can see that hole there, but I'm going to have to take my nose threads, which I'm sewing in black. I've got a doubled strand, I've got my dowel needle with a great big knot on the end. So the hole for my nose is here, and I'm just going to come out just below it. Right on that centre seam though, so that it's going to hold with that knot, and it's going to be covered by that template, and I will just pull that one all the way through. That knot will hold. Then I'm going to test that nose and make sure that it is all nicely covered. And once you're sure that that's all in the correct position, everything's lined up, you can go ahead and clamp the back of that nose into place. Do make sure that this is nice and straight though. Then do the same with your safety eyes in place. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and pack that head nice and firm. Even though this is a little softy, it will help you sew that mouth, the section in, if you've got it packed nice and firm. So go ahead and do that. Make sure that when you're filling, you go ahead and use your wool felting needle to pack in around the base of that neck, ready for that neck joint. So there I have my bear's head all filled out, and it's packed really, really firm. And because I've used that PVA mix on mine, of course it's kept all of that lovely structure and shape as well, and it's allowed me to pack that head really firm without the fabric stretching out and continuing to grow. So it's just been a wonderful fabric to work with, this one. I know I'm going on about it, but it really has been quite an awesome experience for me that I hope to share with all of you in lots of ways. So now that's all packed. Now you will probably have those safety eyes already in there, and you can see that they would be sitting beautifully. My nose is in place, and you can see what I meant about those threads coming out from the base of that nose right on that seam line. Still got those thread ends hanging ready for us to stitch that mouth line in. So the next thing is to sew a running stitch about 1/2 centimetre in from the edge all the way around. Leave your tail ends hanging. That's a doubled strand of extra strong thread, and I've tied my first preliminary knot. You can trim off some excess fur from that edge there if that makes it easier for you, and then we're going to pop in our neck joint, and it's just a matter of pulling in on those threads, and you want to get that neck in as tight as you can around that bolt. It just takes a bit of pressure and a bit of pulling. This is where somebody else's fingers helps you to hold that knot, and then you will knot that off at least 4 times. Okay, so now I am at the point where I've gone ahead, I've added my eyes, teddy bear style, classic style. I'm not going to show you that here. All of my videos that you've seen where I add eyes There's plenty of those to look at if you're not sure on how to do that. I am trying to keep this video really simple, so as I said, I'm assuming you're using safety eyes. So now you can see everything's in place, and we've got our tail ends hanging to stitch in our mouth. I've rethreaded my doll needle, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch in that mouth. So what I want to do is travel down just a little way, and I'm going to take my needle in straight through that center seam line. Now it's important here for the look of your bear, first of all, really find that center seam so everything's nice and straight. But this, what I call the top lip section, you don't want that to be too long. It totally changes the look of your bear. This is a very sweet English style bear, very round, nice broad head, and we don't want a long top lip. So I would say it's around about 7 millimeters from the base there. So I take my needle in, and I'm going to come out at the side of where I want my smile to finish. So I'm going to be guessing it's around about here, and there's so many different mouth shapes you can do. I'm just going for something really classic, and the way that you can test that is take your thread and you can just pull it around the end there of that needle and just see if that's sort of the size of the smile that you're looking to get. Once you're happy with that, pull that needle right the way through. There we go. So that stitch is nicely settled. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up, and I'm going to go under those 2 stitches. I'm not taking any fabric, I'm just slipping my needle under those nose stitches, pulling that all the way through, and you want to place that stitch making sure that they are not twisted. Those threads want to be nice and straight, and give it a bit of a curve and a pull up. Hold my thumb there and pull that one through. So that's going to give us the perfect V shape, and it will disappear, but we're going to do some trimming, so it will disappear within that pile there. You want to really pull that up and give it some tension, and then all you need to do is match it up exactly on the opposite side. So you can pull that pile apart. Don't be snipping it yet, we're going to do that in a minute, and just make sure that you've matched it up exactly on the other side. Dive your needle in. You can come out at the base of the head here, down underneath here, and just knot off a couple of times. You can see that mouth line stitched in there, so you can go ahead. I like to take my awl or just your large doll needle and pull all the coat out from that mouth line, and we're going to do a tiny little bit of trimming. So Sherpa can be trimmed very gently, and it gives a lovely rounded effect. So I want to reveal that line, so I need to really pull out that coat so I can give it a nice clean line. I'm going to use my very sharp little scissors and just going to gently trim along that mouth line and slightly round it up. Do the same on the other side. Be very careful not to snip those mouth stitches. And round it off just a little. You can see now, you notice I'm leaving the coat on the chin to give that little roundy look, but you can really soften this whole area off to give that little chubby sort of a front muzzle look. And it's just enough for us to see that little hint of that chin there. Now the only other area that I trim, depending on your eyes, is just in this corner. Never trim all the way around the eye. It's just this passageway that takes our vision into the eye. Gives us a nice clear view of those eyes. If you take the coat off all the way around, he'll just look starey or startled. We want that nice softness. There we go. I can tidy his chin a little. But overall, he's supposed to be a fuzzy little bear made for cuddling. So the only other thing that you can do, well, that I do, is I take my felt marker and I'm just going to add, because I've got this in a sky blue, I'm just going to add a little depth of colour right at the point of that mouth there. I'm colouring on the lower side, not on the top side. And it's just the tiniest bit of colour. Obviously I'm doing this in blue. I've got my colourless blender here too. These are just your standard alcohol markers. You can get them in many brands. The colourless blender will just pull that colour through and soften it off. By giving a bit of colour there, you're giving a bit of depth. So it looks like that little mouth tapers in, which again makes it softer and rounder. You can add a tiny bit in the corners, which I will probably do. You could do a little around the top part of the nose, but I'm trying to show you that you can keep it all simple and this little bear comes up really well. So that's about it for putting our bear's head together. We're going to sew the ears on last. So let's get started actually putting him all together and jointing him up. Right, so let's put this beautiful boy together, and of course we've got all of our marks already made, all of our holes made in our body to take those joints, those limbs. They get very hidden in amongst all of that Sherpa there. Let me find that again. And I start with the legs. No, I'm going to have a look on the inside. Here it is. Okay, so I'm going to start with the legs. You want to make sure that you're putting them on the right way. So you've got your leg, this is your tummy, and the foot is pointing outwards. Just pop that bolt straight through. Make sure you've really compressed all of those fibres down around that bolt. Then you're going to add your corresponding disc and then a washer and then a nut. If you're using cotter pin joints, of course, you're just going to wind those pins down. I always just finger tighten them at this stage just to check the positioning is right and that there's nothing caught up between those layers. Once you're sure of that, you can go ahead with your spanner and tighten that up. Now you can tighten that up quite tight because it will compress and slacken off in time, but also you must remember that this is intended to be a cuddle bear, so a child's play thing, so don't do them so tight that they can't move the little limbs. So once you're happy with that, then you go ahead and add a drop of super glue just in those threads of that bolt so that nut will never come adrift. Then all you need to do is add the next leg and then the arms at their places in exactly the same way. Once you have those arms and legs in place, we're going to go ahead and follow the same procedure for the head, and we're just going to take that bolt straight through, turn him upside down. Again, we need to make sure that everything's sitting nice and flat before we add our disc and our washer. and that nut. Make sure that that's well secured, but also again remember you want some posability with that head. Always finger tighten first. Check that join. Check that all of your fabric is pulled out. You've got a nice clean neck joint. Everything's moving well. Tighten it as much as you like. And do the same thing and add that drop of super glue. Now once you've got your bear all put together and we've left that super glue just for a couple of minutes to dry, how cute is this? This is so exciting. So now we can just add that filling in the body. Now this is the part where you can keep him quite soft. So already they're just such a lovable bear. So you could add weight in this one, but I actually like to keep these really light because I like to think that these bears are going to be carried around and taken to bed. They need to be nice and light, and they're still a fabulous size. So I'm going to be concentrating on filling out the base of my bear in the bottom area. Fortunately, the Sherpa on the inside is quite porous, being that knit back fabric, so it tends to hang on in a Velcro type way to your stuffing, so it does tend to sit where you put it. So the areas that I'm going to focus on, I am going to fill out around the base of the neck, so that this head will just sit up nicely. But through this midsection and tummy section, I'm going to keep him a little soft. Well, soft for me. Remember, I'm used to packing competition bears, so like rocks. So for me, it'll be soft, squishy like this through the midsection. But fill your bear, keep looking at him and give him a cuddle and see how he feels, because it's all about feel with this bear. I'm definitely going to be showing you some other ways to use this fabric. So if you're wanting more of a collectible style bear that sits on a shelf, we're going to do some incredible work with this. So I'm going to get him filled up. Make sure you get it filled up right to the back there. Use your wool felting needle again to tuck all of that in, and we will be ready for closing. So this has my bear filled, and he's nice and soft through the centre. He's soft, as I said, soft for what I'm used to doing. Now you can see what a beautiful shape he is. Couple of tips for you for filling. If you want your bear to sit with his arms beautifully comfortably like that, and it is a lovely look where they sit just in here, don't overfill in the body underneath this area. Keep this area nice and soft so those arms can fold in like that. At the same time, when you're filling the arms, don't overfill on the underside of the arm, so everything sits beautiful and comfortable. He needs to look like a comfy, squishy bear. So the areas that I've paid particular attention to, around the neck area here is quite firm on the base and around those joints, nice firm buttocks, and kept him soft all through the middle. You can see there I've got a bit of squish there. So now we can go ahead and close that opening, and we're going to do that with the same as we did with the arms and legs, closing those openings. I've got a single strand of extra strong thread. I've got that slightly deeper blue so that I can see what I'm doing. Great big pile of knots at the end, and I have trimmed a little bit of coat away, just a tiny bit. We don't want to take too much because that will be visible, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to find where that seam starts to open out, and you want to take your needle, come up underneath at your seam allowance right at the top there. Pull that all the way through. That knot will hold. Then you're going to travel across, dive in straight across parallel on the other side, and travel down the length of one stitch. And it is exactly the same process as you did with your closing of the arms and legs. Remember what I said about doing 2 stitches and then pulling in as you go. You're just going to go back and forth, back into the same hole each time. Sometimes on the back opening, it can be easier to replace your needle with a curved needle. It just helps you tuck in and come out easier. Do exactly the same thing, get that opening closed, cast off down underneath here, and then we will be ready to sew on those ears. We are now ready to add our ears, so I can take away those temporary ears. I've got my 2 ears that are beautiful and plushy and rounded, and take those off. Now, ear placement is super important, and what we don't want with this bear is ears that look like this, that are straight across, and it just doesn't give any character to your bear at all. You want a nice curve. Now, where you put them, of course, is your choice. You could put them more at the side, or you could put them up in the classic position. You could put them right up like Rupert the bear, whatever you like. I'm going to put them where they seem to sit best. I'm going to take, first of all, a pin through the first top corner of that ear, and I find that it sits naturally really well on your seam line. It's just about there. Now you notice when I'm going to pin the first corner of that ear in, I'm actually going to over angle the pin. So I'm not going in like this, I'm actually going to over angle it and pin it in this way. I'm then going to go pull that ear back, and almost directly behind it drop in another pin. That's about, I'd say, 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch. This way. There's my second pin. It's almost directly behind, just drops down a little. That's what pulls the ear up and allows us to get a really beautiful curve. Now we pull the base around. A couple of things to remember with this, and that is that the base of your ear should never come in front of the start of your ear. That will look strange. It's not a natural ear shape. But you can see that's given me a beautiful curved cupped ear. And you can tell when you've got it nice and cupped because it looks darker in there. See that shadow in there? Can also highlight that with your pens if you want and really increase that. But you can see there where it's sitting, don't have those ears starting too far down, and also we don't want them dropping off the back of that head. It needs to be right on the highest point. And then of course you want to match up the other side exactly. So they're exactly the same. So you can see what I mean about the options, lots of options for ears. So I'm going to get them both pinned into place, and then I'm going to show you the easiest way to sew them on. So I'm happy with that placement there, very English in style. I've sat them quite high on his head, and now I'm going to sew them on. So I'm using a medium doll needle, and I have a knot in the end. A lot of you have seen me do this technique before, but I find it's the easiest way, and that is to have a super long thread. I'm going to go in at the back of the head, anywhere is fine. And we're going to bring our needle out at the very start of that ear there. And I'm coming out through the fabric and the head, not through the ear. Pull that one all the way through. And at the back, that knot, where that's going in, I want to hide it. So I'm going to find the exact hole that it's going into, put my awl in there. Just pop that knot into the head. So that's gone in, that's disappeared. This fabric is great for hiding all those sorts of things too, but I like to make sure. So there we go, that's where your thread's coming out. You're going to take your first stitch into the base of that ear and dive straight into the head and come out at the back, somewhere at the back again. Doesn't really matter where, somewhere up here. I'm going to pull that one in. And you can see already if I tug on that, you can see that front of that ear is getting pulled in, nice and snug. And again, I'm going to find that exit hole, and each time I'm going to go back in. I'm going to be travelling a different path as I come back, and I'm going to do 3 anchoring stitches at the front there. I always do 3. Really pull it in so you can see that I'm going to be sewing them into the head, actually pulling them in and sculpting them into the head rather than trying to sew them to the surface of the head, which ends up giving you an ear that moves like it's on a hinge. If you sew them on this way, they're actually structurally pulled down into the head and they really do stay on really well. So do 3 stitches at the very front so that you know that's really anchored into place. Again, just coming out somewhere at the back of the head. Going to go back in again. Feeling with my thumb there to feel exactly where my needle is coming out. There we go. So that's 3 anchoring stitches. I can take that pin out now. I have got pins all the way around too to keep that nice cupped shape. And now I'm just going to travel along a little and do the same thing along the base of that ear and back out the back again. That's why you need a long thread, because you're going to be using a bit of that going back and forth. Pull that one down and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go in the back of the head and I'm going to come out a little further along, and you just make your way around that entire ear curve that way, going back and forward. When you get down to the base here, you do the same thing and anchor 3 stitches so everything's pulled in nice and tight. Then you can just come out at the base of the head, make a little knot and cut your thread ends. Do the same with the other ear. And so here I have my completed Snuggle Bear. Ears all sewn on now so he can hear me, and look at that finish. Isn't that absolutely beautiful? And plenty of squish and cuddling, and you can squish him and he bounces right back into shape. He's the perfect bear for hugging. So key points to remember with this one: if you want more shape and form to your bear, definitely use that PVA mix at the beginning. This one makes up best, and remember it's designed for Sherpa, for something with a pile. Will make up really well also in a heavier weight polar fleece. It won't be quite as full looking, but it will still be a good result. Not with fabric for this one. If you want to make up a bear in fabric, go for my beautiful memory bear pattern. That works beautifully in fabric. Also, this one can be made up in mohair. If you are going to make this one up in mohair, your pile length should probably be around about 15 millimeters, not longer, I would say, than about 20 millimeters, so that it's not too thick, not too, you don't lose your shape. Once you start getting longer, it changes the whole look. Remember, this bear is all about that beautiful shape. So I really hope you've enjoyed it. My masterclass friends, you could also sculpt a nose in there with your epoxy sculpt. You all know the drill with that one. I have got so much to show you with this fabric. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've just popped a really simple, I've kept with that whole soft feel. I'm imagining him being cuddled with a lovely soft little t-shirt scarf there, something that coordinates. So I'm going to be doing a review on this particular project, on this particular fabric. I'm going to show you a whole lot of colours, and we're going to have a whole lot of fun with it. Thank you so much for joining me today. So thank you all for watching today, watching Snuggle Bear come together. Now, I do have a link for my supplier of Sherpa. Just to give you a price point idea, it's around about $11 for a 1/2 metre, and a 1/2 metre would make up 2 of these bears. So now you see why I'm so into this fabric, and it comes in so many colours. I'm going to be doing a review on Sherpa. I'm going to show you all of the colours that are from my supplier. As I said, I'll put the link down below and you can check them out there. and you'll find they ship overseas if you're overseas. Sherpa is readily available in most fabric stores anyway, and you'll probably find different colours than I can find. But look forward to that video because I'm going to run through it all again with you, because my plan is to create a whole playlist, a whole separate collection of Sherpa animals for you all to make, and we're going to include things like bunnies and dinosaurs and all of those animals that we haven't made yet. I'm really looking forward to it. Let me know if you're as keen on this fabric as I obviously am, and we will move forward with that one. So thank you everybody who's come along and joined Masterclass. It's just been an incredible response, and I'm already seeing Boston Terriers starting to come together on our Facebook page. So come along. If you haven't joined our Facebook page, please come and join us, because we're just such a great positive group and we want to see what you're doing with my patterns. And as I said, already seeing some masterclass projects emerge that are my Boston Terrier, so I'm very excited about that. I'm always happy to see all of the things that you're making. We've got a big year ahead on Pay It Forward. So many new things I'm going to introduce to you all. And if ever you want to chat to me, social media for me is my biggest challenge, and I do try very hard to catch up with you all. If you ever want to speak to me privately, just follow me on Instagram. That link is down below there, and you can chat to me privately on Instagram. If you really want to talk to me one-on-one, that's probably the best place to do it. I'm always going to see it. But make sure you join our Facebook page. It is just the greatest spot to share your Lisa Pay creations, and we all love seeing them. So thank you everybody for your support. Keep on sharing it, and stay creative this week. Stay safe, and most of all, pay all those good things forward. Until next time, it is hooroo from me.